So this morning, it feels like I'm preaching one of the most difficult passages that a pastor can preach from, not because the text is difficult, just because people think that they know what the story is about. And that expectation of, okay, I've kind of got this, I know where he's going, makes you switch off, right? And you're like, yeah, I've heard this story hundreds of times, no surprises. I can start thinking about my party tonight, or going to bed, or whatever. I'm going to try to prove you wrong this morning, that you know a lot of the story, but maybe not everything. So we know the story as the parable of the prodigal son. You can also call it, and we just sang about it now, your goodness is running after me. You can actually call it the parable of the running father. That's closer to the truth about what the main point of the parable is. But, as you know, Jesus begins his parable with these words. There was a father who had two sons. And what you're supposed to hear and keep in mind is this is his way of saying there are two kinds of people in the world. And at the end, you're supposed to ask yourself, which one am I? So let's start with the first brother. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. Basically, what he says is, I want my dad's things, but I don't want him. From now on, I'm going to live my life as if my father is already dead. I want my inheritance now. In 1966, for the first time in its history, Time magazine had a cover with no picture on it, only red words on a black background. A few years ago, this issue was called The Cover That Shook the World. Here's the full cover. Robbie, you can just go one forward. Is God dead? Remember, 1966. So, the point of the article, written more than 50 years ago, is people don't really have a need for a higher being anymore. The article says, we're fine on our own. I also remember a few years ago, there was a British author who's also an atheist. And he had these posters put on buses. And the posters said, you can go one. Oh, we have there we go. There's probably no God. Let's go back, thanks. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. So, these are two extreme examples of the first brother. Some people want to live as if God doesn't exist, as if he's dead. Now, in this culture, a father was the ultimate authority in a family. You don't talk to him like this. It would have been acceptable for him to chase away his son after the son asking for his inheritance, and even physically beat his son. This father does something else. We have a New Year's computer. It's kind of behind the whole time. So, he divided his property between them. Most translations miss the deeper truth of what's going on here. What it actually says is, he divided his bios between them. And bios is where we get the word biology. Which means, what the verse says is, he divided his life between them. 2,000 years ago, you didn't inherit money or furniture from your parents. An inheritance was always a piece of land to farm on. And what he means here is, this father spent his entire life building and maintaining his farm. Now he has to sell a part of it. He's selling a part of his life's work. According to their tradition or culture, the eldest child always inherited twice as much as the other children. So in this case, the father would sell 1/3 of the farm for this son. The remaining 2/3 are kept for the other son for one day when he gets his inheritance. Last week was Christmas. How many of you on Christmas Day called a family member that lives in another country? Just show of hands. Yes. Don't live there, but okay. Most of us. And for us, we know that technology makes it possible to stay in touch with your loved ones, even though they're far away. Not so in the first century. And what happens next is this son, it says, he goes to a distant country. And what we should hear is, he goes to a place where he can't keep in touch with his family. It just doesn't work like that in the first century. And the next verse is important, if we can get there. There, he squandered his wealth in wild living. If you read the words, wild living, what do you picture? You don't have to say it out loud, because, if we're honest, wild living sounds like something that happens in an R-rated movie, right? So, you need to be 18 or older to understand this. That's not at all what this word means. Jesus doesn't explain exactly how he spends his money. A better translation of this verse would just be, he wasted, or Robbie, thanks, he wasted his wealth, or he spent his wealth in a wasteful way. Nothing more, nothing less. The next part is important. Now we go from bad to worse, where you read, after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. Even though he lost everything, there might still be a chance for him to work his way back up again. But the famine makes that impossible. This is the recession of the ancient world. And while he's hungry, he longs to go back home. He says, my father's farmhands, they eat 3 meals a day. Even the pigs have better food than I. And he decides, I'm going back home. But first, before he does that, he rehearses his speech. He says, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And do you see what his master plan is? What he tells himself is, I am going to work off my debt. Now, a father, or a farmer like this father, would have 2 kinds of workers on his farm. Number one would be a slave. Number two would be a hired servant. We would call it a day laborer. And the difference is, a slave was part of the housing arrangement of his master. A slave lived in the same house as the master and was actually part of the family setup. A day laborer or a hired servant would live somewhere else, usually in town or in the village or wherever. And does it make sense what he tells himself in his speech? I know I can never live under the same roof as my father again. That's why I'll ask to be a hired servant who lives somewhere else rather than a slave who lives with my father. That is how close I can get. And on his way home, his father sees him, and we know this part well, but what you need to keep in mind is owners of farms were respected people, which means certain things were beneath you, like running. You don't run if you own a farm. Children run, women run, rich farm owners kind of just stroll like this. I am very important as I walk. This father runs, embraces him, kisses him, doesn't even react to the speech. And then you read these words. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. So, new clothes, the special ring, and the best part of all, a party with food and music. What more could the father do to show his son, you're not going to work your way back into the family? Welcome, you're in, done. We, who know the story, know conflict is just around the corner. Great joy will be followed by great anger. And interestingly, what the elder brother is so angry about most is the fattened calf. And here's the reason. Meat wasn't a regular part of their diet. It was too scarce. Only the richest of the rich could afford a fattened calf. This father, without any hesitation, has it slaughtered. And now you learn something about the other brother. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. There are two kinds of people in the world. Those who break the rules, younger brothers, and those who follow the rules, older brothers. Another way you can say it is, some people want to live as if there isn't a God who expects anything from them. The other kind of person does everything he or she can to be obedient to God. And we'll get back to that later. Look at what he says next. Still the older brother. But when the son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you killed the fattened calf for him. Since I was a child, I've read this story. But there's a small detail that I missed all these years. And here it is. the youngest son goes to a distant country. No one in his family has any way of keeping track of his decisions. The older brother sees the party, refuses to go in, and then he says, "The son of yours," not my brother, "the son of yours has squandered your property." How? With prostitutes. That's impossible for him to know. And here's where things get interesting. What you see here is the story the oldest son tells himself about where the other brother's money went. He believes the worst possible story about his brother. If you see yourself as a good person, pay attention to what you tell yourself about sinners, those people who aren't as good as you are. What do you believe about their values, their priorities, their motivations? Because I look at others through the lens of the story I tell myself about them. Some of us don't see a homeless person. I see someone who's not willing to work hard enough to earn a living. Some of us don't see a divorced person. I see someone who wasn't willing to give everything to save a marriage. Or something you hear in some churches. I don't see a sick person. I see someone who doesn't have enough faith to be healed. Pay attention to the story you tell yourself about others. So I want you to picture this. The father and his son stand outside the party. Jesus' audience would now be on the edge of their seats. How is it going to end? Does he go back inside? And here is the final verse of the parable. The father says, "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." My son, everything I have is yours. That is literally the truth. Because 1/3 of the property of the farm is already gone. It's sold. The remaining 2/3 are the older brother's inheritance. Which means the fattened calf actually belongs to him. And that's why he's so furious. My father slaughtered my calf without even asking my permission. He couldn't care less about his father's joy, only what the cost will be to him to bring his younger brother back. What a brilliant parable. First, Jesus introduces us to a bad child who indirectly says, "I want my father's things, but I don't want my father." And then he introduces us to a good child who says, "I want my father's things, but I don't want my father." There are two kinds of people in the world: rule breakers and rule followers. And Jesus' point is, both are lost. Outwardly, they look completely different. But beneath the surface, their hearts are exactly the same. Neither of them want the Father, only what He can give them. But one of them says, if I can escape from my Father, then I'll be able to enjoy His good things. While the other one says, if I stay with my Father and I'm obedient, then I'll deserve His good things. Let's just quickly jump back to the beginning of the chapter. So Luke 15 verse 1, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Then Jesus told them this parable, the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, the parable of the lost son. And here's what you need to keep in mind. Luke 15 isn't supposed to be this feel-good story. It's a warning to religious people. Be careful that you don't become like the elder brother who tries to win God's approval through your obedience. Elder brother types work like slaves to prove their worthiness. Can you go one more? Okay. Is the slide gone? Oh my goodness. My prayer for Grace Church, I'm just trying to remember where those slides went. Okay, I got it. Elder brothers work like slaves to prove their worthiness to God. In another place, Jesus tells the teachers of the law, the sinners will enter God's kingdom before you do. And those of you who've read the New Testament, you know that Jesus kept on telling His disciples that it's especially religious people who are spiritually in danger. Why? Because they rely more on their own goodness than on God's grace. It's the religious people who are the most in trouble because they don't understand what God is up to. I kind of wish the parable had a different ending. Because Jesus leaves the ending open. We know at least the bad child is in the party, but we don't know what happens to the good child. Does he confess his selfishness, or does he prefer to stay outside? Jesus doesn't tell us. So if I had to give a new ending to this parable, I can think of two possibilities. Number one, the oldest son who's outside says, my heart has been changed by my father's joy. I will go back inside, welcome my brother back and say, it's okay. I'm willing to carry the cost. Welcome back home. Or option number two, the younger son who's inside walks out of the party, invites his elder brother in and says, I know this is going to cost you a lot, but I want to celebrate with you. That's not what happens. The brother who's supposed to be outside stays inside. And the brother who's supposed to be inside stays outside. The father has compassion for both of them, but they're not willing to do it for each other. This is a parable about two children who don't understand what's important to their father. And with which character do you identify? Maybe you feel a bit like the prodigal runaway child. And this morning, you need to ask for God's forgiveness because you're living your life as if He doesn't exist. Your decisions are being driven by whatever gives you the most pleasure. Or maybe you're a good, hard-working Christian. According to Jesus, you also need to ask for God's forgiveness because sometimes you do the right thing for the wrong reason. I'm obedient. I'm responsible like a slave. And deep down, I believe I deserve God's goodness in my life. My prayer for Grace Church in 2024 is that we would stop believing that there are two kinds of people in the world. Followers of Jesus don't divide the world into moral and immoral, because what we know is, what they have in common is, both are sinners, both are lost, both are totally dependent on God's goodness and grace. May this be a church where we embrace each other and despite our differences are willing to invite each other in to God's party where we can celebrate His goodness together. Let's pray. Lord, would you remind us that you don't expect us to be like slaves working for you, proving ourselves to you. You just want us to be your children. And thank you that we can know Jesus was our true older brother who went out and looked for us, not in a distant town, from heaven to earth, so that we could be clothed in a new robe, a robe of honor, because He was willing to hang naked on a cross. I want to pray that Grace Church would be a place where good children and bad children feel welcome, because we realize this is a place where God's grace and goodness is a felt reality, not just something we talk about, but part of the DNA of who we are as a church. May you send us out today to be salt and light, to be good brothers and sisters to a sinful, broken world, and that we would make God's goodness and glory visible to everyone. We pray this in your name. Amen.